Okay, so hello everyone, Chumrip Sua, and welcome to what is our first guest talk session within the Professional Project Cambodia course this year. Before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge the Muru Oradil people, who are the traditional custodians of the land where I am now. And I'd also like to acknowledge the custodians of all of the lands on which we sit as a group today. I would like to extend my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge over 65,000 years of shared practice and teachings from Indigenous communities in what we now call Australia. I'd also like to acknowledge the Indigenous communities of Cambodia and the responsibility that we all have in finding ways for these voices to come to the fore. Today, we are really lucky to have with us a few people who I really admire. Professor David Sanderson, who is the Inaugural Judith Neilson Chair in Architecture at UNSW, and one of our other colleagues, Jayde Roberts, who is a Senior Lecturer in the Architecture program and an expert in Architecture and Urbanism in Asia, also at UNSW. David and Jayde are really kind of leading thinkers in areas of humanitarian aid and community-based approaches. So some of the big themes that kind of intersect with this program and this course. And they deal with some of the issues that we've been starting to talk about that come into play when we work on projects that kind of intersect with cities that are rapidly urbanising. So they'll be sharing some of their insights in this space. We're also really lucky to have two alumni from this program. So we have Sarah MacDonald. Sarah is a graduate from the Masters of Architecture program at UNSW. And we also have Villy Huotrine, who is currently a senior student in the Architecture and Urbanism program at the Royal University of Fine Arts in Phnom Penh. So Villy has been part of this program for 2 years now, and we're very lucky to have these students involved. So the way that today will work is that we will hear from our guests for about 30 minutes, and then we have about 20 minutes for questions and discussion. What we might do is just ask everyone to turn their cameras and audio off for the talks, but please feel free to raise your hand. There's a hand button on Teams, or pop questions into the chat, and I can moderate those as they arise. What we'll do is we'll start with David, and then we'll go to Jayde, and then to Villy, and then we'll end with Sarah. So I'll hand over to David now.
Great. Well, thanks very much. Can I ask actually if you keep your cameras on? Would you mind terribly? Because otherwise I'm talking to my screen. So please do pop them on again. Thank you.
That's a good point, David. It's always weird and hard talking to a blank screen or a letter on a screen, isn't it?
It's real time. Anyway, excuse me. Thank you so much. What a big introduction. I'm prepared to be underwhelmed. But it's very nice to meet you all, and congratulations all of you for being part of this thing. I think Eva, sparing your blushes, runs the best program in the faculty when it comes to this, hands down, without question, because it's inquiring and it's thoughtful and it puts people first and not us first. So I just want to talk about 6-7 minutes around architects work in this area. And excuse me if I'm going to be a bit candid. I trained as an architect and I loved it. And in 1991, a long time ago, I did a master's course in development, and my world changed, and I haven't looked back, and I felt very privileged. And this is not false modesty to say I know less than I knew then, because the further you go, the less you know, because you realize there are lots of answers to almost every question. That doesn't paralyze us into inaction, but it does mean, just shut up and listen. That would be a key takeaway, I would say. I just wanted to share 5 or 6 quick thoughts. This is not a polished presentation. This is more of a discussion and hopefully a slight provocation with a smile. My first takeaway, I would say, first thing, by the way, architecture, the best education ever, because you see things, you put things together, the best way you do art and science, you can specialize. What a privilege. And if I was to do it again, I would choose architecture every time again. That said, traditional architectural education, not wrongly, is geared towards a formal system where things work. You have clients where you have a hierarchical structure where basically you're taught to defend why you're right, the crit system, and there is some logic to that. My experience, I think what I've read and learned from others, is that developmental work is about as opposite as it gets to that. Okay, it's about as opposite as it gets to formal architectural education. You don't grab the pen, you give the pen to somebody else. You don't tell people the answers, you listen and ask the questions. You do the opposite. It's certainly what I was taught and what I've seen taught in architecture schools in a lot of places. Okay, so that doesn't paralyze you into inaction, but if you think you've got the answer, stop thinking you've got the answer. Okay, people are less interested in design buildings, actually, frankly, not in many respects, because it might be you're sick or your child's unwell or you don't have a job or whatever it is. You know that saying, if you've got a hammer, all the problems look like nails. We are in a profession where we're taught to think about buildings. And for a lot of people, it's not about that. Okay, so let me just say that. One of the best phrases I ever heard and have learned from about 25 years ago from a man called Robert Chambers is whose reality counts. The reality that counts is not what I think is a middle-aged white male from Europe. The reality that counts working in a low-income settlement might be the 7-year-old girl or the 94-year-old grandfather living in an informal settlement, or the mother of 5 and she's 19 years old and works 7 days a week for, I don't know, $3 every other day or something. You know, that's the reality of people. So who cares what I think? My role is to listen and support and facilitate and humbly share anything I might have picked up along the way. But it's not giving answers. It is not that. Yeah, process, not product. You know, it's about process of engagement, process of ownership, process of everything. It's not David's project, it's someone else's. As soon as you start engaging in something, give it away, okay? And if you find you're doing it on your own, you're not doing it right. Okay, reality is complicated and hard, and there are shades of grey, and it's complex, and things work on Monday, and they don't work on Tuesday, and they work on Wednesday, and they don't work on Thursday. Often government and formal structures are often come to throw you out rather than to help you. People like us can be very intimidating because we're part of the elites, because we may not think that, but actually we have formal educations. So we can be very frightening to people who may not be able to read and write. So how do you engage in a way? It's respectful, it's humility, and it's all those things that I don't doubt Eva talks about, because Eva really knows this stuff. I think I'll stop there. It's a bit of a ramble, and maybe it's a conversation later on, but that's all I wanted to say to get us going. But well done for choosing this course. Okay.
Thank you, David. I mean, there's so much to to mine there, but let's go to Jayde, and then maybe we can start to connect some dots across the talks. Thanks, Jayde.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. Like David, I thought I would just come and talk because I thought you would have been looking at the screen and slides for too long now at the end of term 3. Like David, well, so I should start with the fact that although I also did architecture, at Berkeley, we started with the people-oriented approach, and we very much went out into the community. And so it's interesting for me to see how architectural education can be a little bit different in different countries. So while we were also asked to look at the building, that didn't come until the 3rd year. So I was lucky. And I'm very thankful for that, actually, because then it was more about how do we all make a place together? And the meaning of that place or the form of that place could manifest itself in many different ways. So that kind of foundation that my teachers gave me was very helpful. Once I finished school and ended up living in Asia, trying to do something that was useful in the world, I found that the more facilitative approach enabled me to enter communities more easily, but not without problems. Because I look like I'm from Asia, right? And it would seem that I should be able to enter easily. But it created an interesting tension where in Myanmar, where I do my work, or when I went to Cambodia to give a talk, or in Thailand, people assume I'm local. And then they're like, what's wrong with you, lady? You don't get it. So that kind is always necessary because we come in from the outside. And even if we have good intentions, how do we make that known? And how do we, as David says, listen enough to pick up on what the local community finds to be relevant or urgent in that moment? And because I was lucky enough to have been to Phnom Penh, and you guys are probably reading about the history. It's a very troubled history. And the role of the government, especially in terms of the city, is highly problematic, right? You can't even talk about rights. There is no right to the city or right to residence or right to protest because Hun Sen doesn't care for that. So then working with the locals, and I was glad that Eng, I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly, you went in to talk with some people and they're like, don't come into my house. It's a little bit messy. Please don't do that. That will be interesting to pay attention to and to care for enough so that you can build the relationship and begin to find information, not only for yourself and what you need to do, but what the local residents want you to know, because that will remain hidden for quite a long time. In my own work in Myanmar, it's been 10 years and I'm still like, oh, what? Sorry? you know, so so the kind of the word I like to use is attunement. How do you listen? How do you see? And how do you correct your lens when the reality in front of you tells you, that is not the right way to look at it? And, some of the methods might be, I'll just quickly share one slide. I'm sure Eva has shown you guys this kind of thing before. So I'm going to just show you this picture. Dook. I'm clicking the share content thing. Is it working? Hold on. Oh, you know what? It's telling me open system preferences. Never mind. Okay, so I was right and not trying to share pictures.
Drop it into the chat if you want to, Jayde. I can do it, or don't worry if
okay.
it's all too hard.
Yeah, I'll do it after I finish talking.
Yeah.
But there are many ways to facilitate processes, and there are things like community building processes, open space processes, and some of my former students in Yangon are going into the informal settlements and have these nice, very simple, just butcher paper on the wall, and people come up and stick things on there, and it can feel frustrating. And I want to bring it up because you're going to be there for a short time. So you will begin a process and then you'll leave, and it might feel like, well, we just started something, what's it going to do? Right? So you have to have such patience and to have the long-term view about what is possible. So I was going to show you how they did the facilitated design work with Post-its, and that actually it hasn't really landed in anything concrete because it's only been 2 years since they did this process. And then I'll also share another picture where I put in informal settlement is not a euphemism for slum, which it is in everyday use. When we say informal settlement, most people think encroachment or squatting or slum. And that's a problem in our world because of the negative associations with it. And it happens to be a really nice little house in an informal settlement. So I just wanted to give you that visual provocation. So hold on one second. Now my screen is doing weird stuff. Okay, and other than that, the how do we communicate other than listening? And then Eva brought up the point of documentation. Documentation is a very professional thing to do. It's what we do, as experts and professionals. And in my work thus far, I find that whether it was in China or in Southeast Asia, people didn't think to document because it's a particular way of placing value on your life or your house or your world that isn't the lived everyday. And so the act of documentation is on the one hand to value what is there, but by making it so apparent, make them vulnerable. And in Phnom Penh, and so in Cambodia and in Myanmar and in Thailand and in Indonesia, all of the Southeast Asian countries, this is a problem. So how you document to the extent to which we make a reality legible is an act of power. And it's very important in Southeast Asia. So I wanted to make sure to bring that up. And other than that, I am done.
Thank you, Jayde. Yeah, that idea of attunement is one that I think kind of intuitively has been coming up in lots of the students' comments and discussions this week. And we're only 4 days into the project, so it's very early stages. And the other one I think that's interesting and that has come up a little bit is the short-term nature of this course, right? So it's 4 weeks. And our ability to impact in that 4 weeks. And maybe again, I just say to the students, think about engaging in complexity and not trying to oversimplify what are really kind of complex issues where, you know, lots of histories and stories and regulations and, you know, needs and desires come and they kind of intersect all in one. Don't try to simplify it for the sake of this course. I would say that this course plays a small role in relationships that will go on for a really long time, and you might be setting the platform for something that, as David was saying, someone else steps into. And it might be part of UNSW, it might be part of the relationships that exist around this course.
Can I just add to that, Eva, since you mentioned that? In previous jobs, I used to run field trips. Even the phrase isn't nice. You know, visits to other places to spend time with people, with architecture students. And a win for me was not that I wanted people to be lost and confused. That's not the point. But if you come away from that thinking, oh my God, you know, it's so if I'm serious about it, it's so intractably complex. And I'm a bit lost in that. That's a big win. I'd say that'd be a metric of success. I really mean that. That's enough. Because it's the beginning of the story and it's very complicated.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Because to be open enough to what the field side or the project presents to you means to contend with or grapple with your own ability to make sense of it all. And if you can do that, then other people, at least in my experience, then the local people who live there or the interlocutors who live there, then are more able to speak to us because we're no longer so expert.
I think as well, Tom has set up this course in a really nice way that allows that, it allows this type of learning to happen. So the course is not by any means about an end product. It's actually about based learning and collaborative learning. So it's learning from one another, learning through interactions with your workplace host, learning through interactions like this, learning through interactions with the community, and not having to come to an end point. And that's what I love about this intersection of the course with these projects.
And I think completely agree, Eva. And I think further to that too, just that notion of the self and the growth of the self in the context of working in the field as well. And I'm sure Sarah will talk about that too through her experience. But that idea of reflection, which doesn't happen a lot in the university context, I think. And this course, I hope that you all really find that you're not only learning as you engage with communities about, you know, wider context, but you're also learning a huge amount about yourself in terms of future work, but in terms of what your passions are, where you want to head with your professions. So, yeah.
Well, why don't we hand over to Villy now, Villy Huotrine, who's here from the Royal University of Fine Arts, and then we can go on to Sarah. And please just pop questions or have them in your mind into the chat, or have them in your minds, and we can ask them after the next 2 talks. Villy, how are you going there?
Yeah, so should I start share my screen now?
That would be great if you can.
Okay.
Thanks, Villy.
Okay, this is the course that I participated in last year. It hosted by Sasa Art and the One More One project last time. And at that time, we mapping and explore urban in Phnom Penh. So when we expect to join this program, if we want to learn something new, because we may cannot learn something like this in school. So I hope all of this will benefit our future career. Maybe it will give us more credit to apply for scholarship or a good work. So the next one I'm going to talk about working cultural. For me, like it's a new experience. Like everyone should experience one in life. So we can sharing and change an idea about their perspective in architecture. So it was a sorry, I'm a bit uh, nervous now. Sorry.
You're doing a great job, Villy. This is very relaxed, not formal.
Okay. So when I joined this workshop, I expect to learn from the host placement and from a teamwork. So I want to learn from everyone from across the country to share their idea, what they think about architecture, and how can we make it together or maybe working together. So at that time, we chose to study about mapping Chendamdai urban form, where all the Chinese temple or church and pagoda in the same blocks. It was an interesting site and with a historical story. During the internship, we sharing what we have been working to another student from street life study, and it was my first time that I had to present in English language, and I think all the Cambodia students should more confident in talk in another language because it is your good chance that you can improve your professional skill and your language skill. So during that internship, we are very welcome to join the guest talk or any activity that involve with street life study student. So we not only learn from the host placement, but we also learning from street life study as well. So this is some tip that I'm going to share with participants this year. So when you want to mapping something, so you should go to the site maybe almost every time, because at that time I went to the site almost every day, both from day or afternoon time or maybe night time. So when you go there, you can see what happening in the morning or what are different in the afternoon or maybe more activity in the night time. So I think you should go there every time as much as possible, and you try to see and explore what you interested in, then you start to mapping for your work. And the second is interview. So when you go there, you have to interview both from adult people or maybe a kid in that place. So you have to ask them about what history, what bring them to live inside that poor urban planning. And I think UNSW students should write up some question, what you gonna ask and what you wanna know from resident there. And the Cambodian student will be a supporter role to translate and help you to get all those information. So at that time, I work closely with Pika Verma, and I try to interview the kid in the community and translate it to Pika Verma. And at the result, she produced her artwork. It's about kid perspective in architecture, like where they go from their home to school and how can they remember the architecture in their community. And another skill is teamwork. When you're working together cultural. I hope you can still keep in touch every time and try to talk with your teammate and make you feel comfortable to talk to them and closer. So when you work together, you will produce a good quality of work. So the last thing is your mentor, because your mentor, they are rich in architecture and art. And if you have something to talk, I hope you can talk to your mentor. It's better than the former participant because they know like what they should do for you, and always check your work with them. Like you want to make something like this, so what you're gonna show to the audience, how to make it interesting. So yeah, I hope Cambodian student or UNSW student, you should always talk to your mentor about your idea, what you're gonna show to the audience, and then you find your inspiration, or maybe they can help you to find inspiration to make it happen. So as the result of my internship last year, we showed the exhibition at Royal University of Fine Art, and it also published on Khmer Tham, which is International Youth of Cambodia. It was like I'm really happy and very impressed, and it really inspired me to working in this program and also working with community. I think that's all from my side, and thank you. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Okuncharan, thank you, Villy.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my Olympic skill not good.
No need to say sorry. You know, you're speaking in a language that's second to Khmer, so we're amazed that you can do that, and I'm sure a lot of us would do a much worse job. I for sure would. We'll hand over now to Sarah, and then we'll have some time for questions. Thank you, Villy.
Yeah. Thanks, Villy. It's nice to be revisited, reminded of all those things as well. Preparing for these presentations is always lovely to remember the experience, because it was so profound, especially on me and my perception of architecture as well. So let me just share my presentation. Great. So can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, we can, Sarah.
Wonderful, thank you. So, hello, I'm Sarah. I did the Habitat for Humanity internship last year with Michael, who's here as well. And it was quite a different experience, and something that I didn't really know what to expect when going into it. Something that I highly recommend, and I'm so glad that we have a bunch of students, both from UNSW and local students from Cambodia also participating in this. And that I am so honoured to be able to share my experience as well. And so this is the team that we were working with in the Cambodia office, based in Phnom Penh. And it was, yeah, a really full-on experience, but we made really close friends, great acquaintances and great mentors through that as well. So my expectation of going into Habitat, being a large organisation, was that we'd kind of go in, we'd meet with the community, we'd probably build a house. But the reality of when we got onto the ground was something quite different. And that was that we were in an office from 8 till 5 p.m. every day, in comparison to the SASA students who were out on the streets. And it was quite a shock, because we firstly didn't know what to expect working in an office environment, but also that it was a bit of a change, in a really great way though. So upon reflection, which is something that was really useful in the course, was having that moment to reflect, as was spoken about before, seeing what happens behind the scenes and all the work that goes into just building a house is not just people on the ground, not just working with the community, but also the preparation in the understanding, in the construction, in the sourcing, in all of these day-to-day challenges that they face, not only just within the organisation, but also across Cambodia, and I would assume as well across a lot of places, we'll be having similar struggles in terms of finding materials, having skilled workers, and just being able to share knowledge across different organisations as well, to build that platform to increase the quality for housing. So our internship project was looking at really understanding context. And going back to what Jayde was speaking about before, it was really just that 4 weeks was just a moment, just a snapshot of the time that we had. It wasn't necessarily about what we could give, but also what we could receive, kind of package up in terms of our knowledge and our insights, and then hand to someone else to then continue the journey. And that was something that was a realization that developed over those 4 weeks as well. It wasn't just something that this is the starting point, this is the project, and this is what we have to do at the end of it to have a result. But it was more, what can we learn and how can we pass this on as well? So these were some of the final proposals that Michael and I presented on our final day. But we learned as well that it is a collaborative process. A lot of what was produced would be constantly evolved by future students, by the team working at Habitat as well. But it was just really about, again, this snapshot of ideas about how we could capture some of the knowledge, some of the stories that we had heard and kind of gathered during our limited time, and then how we could pass that on again. It was just a really strong theme that came through, is that we're just here for a moment. And so some of the key learnings that I really wanted to focus on is these 3 ideas of architects as activists. So looking at the role of architecture and how we can contribute to the community that's beyond what is expected or what we're taught at university. Number 2 is go beyond what's comfortable. So there are so many times, I know in my own personal experience, that we can just stay in the box, maybe for an assessment. We don't want to push the boundaries, particularly at university. You have a little bit more freedom, but in real work, it's a bit more scary. But I really challenge you during this time that break that box, go beyond, and challenge this idea of comfort. And number 3 is advocacy and opportunity. So looking at how we can then use our experience and share that with others to then benefit everyone, either the community, other students, other professionals, anyone who we kind of come into contact with. How can this experience that we've had then be shared with others? So then my advice to you, taking those key learnings on board, is something that's also come through in the other presentations this morning. So really listen. Listen to the stories, listen to the people, from your mentors, from your peers, from everyone. Just absorb everything. Number 2 is ask questions. There is so much we don't know, particularly as students coming from Australia. I found that I just had no idea about Cambodian culture coming into it. And so listening, asking questions, and not being afraid to ask those questions as well, even if it's a simple thing, was really beneficial. Number 3, listen harder. So once you've kind of done this first part, you've got this surface level understanding, asking questions, getting a bit deeper, go back and listen again. It's just such an important part of the process. Number 4, go find out more. So not just settling with what's kind of in front of you, but go watch movies, go read books, any articles that you find. Look into some of the organisations that are on the ground, not just in our industry of construction, architecture, building, but also what other organisations are out there, looking at these wider concerns that affect the community. Because as I think it was David who mentioned before, that it's not always the buildings that are the primary concern for most people. What are the other influences that impact on their lives? And number 5 is enjoy. Like, we had such a great experience meeting so many people, eating amazing food, learning about culture and language, about the history and heritage as well. But really take this opportunity to make the most of all of your connections and to enjoy learning and enjoy being part of that process. So thank you very much. That is just some of what I would like to share today. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah and Villy and Jayde and David. I love that listening came up as a theme in all 4 of those presentations. And I'll start our Q&A session with a question. So to anyone, you're engaged in this project, you're going out to the community and you're listening, and the community says, I don't want to engage. I'm not interested in this project. I have other concerns. No, thank you. But someone's engaged you to work on that project. What do you do? No black and white answers here, just for discussion. Jayde, let's start with you.
Oh, of course you're going to pick on me. That has happened to me. So,
me too.
Yeah. I think, I teach in architecture and urbanism in Asia for a very specific reason, and that's because of my past experience and the need to be very circumspect when we enter Asia. And Asia is not one thing. So some of you have taken my course, so you know it's not one thing. So the authorities in Southeast Asia very rarely talk to the people who live in their cities and in those countries. And so they have an idea of what should be done. And because they have power and they have money and they have access, they will bring people in, usually foreign experts, with some dollars or lots of dollars. And then interns or experts are deployed to go do something. So here is an opportunity, a very uncomfortable situation to be in, but an opportunity to then ask questions to see what the local residents want, and they might not want to talk to you, so you just have to keep going back and then trying to feed back that information to the authorities. And the authorities probably don't want to listen to you, but if we have the privilege of being seen as an expert or some foreign mouthpiece that can do something that somebody wants done, then we can use that opportunity to talk both ways and to, at least for me, it's often quite uncomfortable to put on the robes or the look of the international expert. But if I'm talking to authority, then I will put on that face and go, all right, I come from this university and I've been asked to do X, Y, and Z. I've gone into the field and this is what I've heard. Probably we need more time to gather information. And if it's a funded project, there are all sorts of issues about when you have to deliver, the theory of change, when the money has to change hands, to be able to learn enough about that project to intervene in a small way, especially if you're going for a short period of time. So it's really uncomfortable, and it's a power play that you might not have dealt with. But try it on and see what happens. I mean, you have to be careful, and you don't want to put yourself at risk, whether it's too much mental pressure or people are really angry at you or you feel unsafe in the neighborhood or something. But it's a rare opportunity and it's a lot of hard work, but you can do a little bit of good if you try. Little bit. Yeah. I'm done.
Thanks, Jayde. I'll leave the floor open for anyone to add on to that or to change direction with another question to any of our guests.
If I may, can I just add a PS to that in 30 seconds? I couldn't agree more, of course, to what Jayde said. It is all about valuing the relationship. It is all about valuing the relationship. And I was just looking for a diagram with quadrants about valuing relationships. If I force, you withdraw. If we engage together, then we collaborate. And then there are 2 other quadrants about, I forget what they are. It's all about valuing. If I force it, you withdraw. And it's my project, not yours. And then you're dead in the water.
Yeah. Actually, I wrote down full on when Sarah said that. And I like that word. And I think if we're able to still stay with it or to work through all of the difficulties when it's full on, because it is full on. It can be very rewarding. But if we retreat and like, oh my God, this is too much of a mess, whatever, then it probably will feel quite disappointing in the end. So the studios that I've helped to lead in China, where the students really tried and, you know, several things went wrong, but at the end of it, and maybe not at the end, maybe like a year later, they would be like, Jayde, you know what? That was cool. I hated it then, but it was cool afterwards. So yeah, so full on is a lot, but it can be very rewarding.
I think further to what Jayde's just said too, I think a lot of that, a lot of learning comes from discomfort or from being in a place that you're not used to. And I think a lot of it is about, you know, taking a risk. And I think it's a big thing in the professional world as well, just learning that that actual learning happens through taking risks, and often it is a while later that you realise, and it's through things like self-reflection and we start to realise that those moments were actually really fundamental and important. I noticed, Anastasia, you've got your hand up too. Did you have a question?
Not a question. Well, it's sort of a question, but also like to further like the discussion is like, would you also say that like you could potentially like turn this into advocacy for the community to the organizations and governments that are using it as a, and rather than, and like you can hopefully create like advocacy from bottom up, even if that advocacy is to be said to like leave this community alone. That makes sense?
It does. It does. David, do you want to go first?
Well, in fact, I was just forming another thought, so I'll hold on. But nice to see you, Anya. No, after you, Jayde. I want to throw in something.
I'm very cautious with that. We want to do good in the world, and we want to be of service. We want to care. But if the project is so short in duration, I have found that maybe either I myself as the teacher or my students don't quite know enough to advocate well. If you're working with somebody from Sasa or Aang or Villy, you know, if all of you are coming together and you're recognizing that something needs to be done or said, and it's through very careful and collaborative participatory discussion, then you might speak up. But throughout Southeast Asia, there have been many, many examples of people who really mean well, but land and start advocating something within a month, 2 months, even 6 months. And it's like, do you know what you're advocating? You don't speak the language. You don't know the history. You don't know the culture. You don't know the gender dynamics. You don't know the history of violence, and you're advocating. So there is a certain privilege and a positionality with advocacy that I would want. I'm careful with, and if I take students to Myanmar, I ask them to be super careful. So that's my take on it.
Can I add 2 sentences on the end of that? Yeah, where I'm from in the UK right now, there's quite a strong critique emerging around the white saviour, frankly, charging off and doing stuff. Rightly, it doesn't mean it was all wrong, by the way, but it is an appropriate thing to be saying these things, and things that we took for granted recently are different now, and they'll be very different in the future. So it's about know thyself. I mean, I worked in egg for a long time before I fell into academia, and I met a lot of people who were of a saviour mentality, and that doesn't mean they're wrong, by the way. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It's just be self-aware. Be self-aware, and then do what you say when you can. And the capacity to do harm, by the way. A big phrase 20 years ago in the aid sector was "do no harm," taken from the medical world. We do have the capacity to do harm, so tread carefully.
And now I want to add to that. Now ADB with their projects no longer have the fallacy of doing no harm. They say do minimal harm or minimize harm. So, yeah.
I think, Anya, time is just plays such a big role here, and the way that Panya and Lino talk about advocacy in this project is that would come at the end of a long, potentially end, maybe some spots through, of a really long process that's based on building trust with the community. So you might think about your work as kind of a little part of that bigger project. that will go, you know, already they've been working with these communities for many years, 10 years more, and that will continue.
Eva, I've just noticed Sam's put a comment up there.
Oh, yes.
Is it about changing tactics in terms of how you approach the personal community when you come back? Now, did David or Jayde or Sarah want to speak to that?
Come back from the field, you mean?
No, in terms of if you get an initial rejection from the people that you're trying to engage with, because obviously it's about kind of I'm wondering from your perspective and your experience, it's about kind of trying to understand, you know, what speaks to those people that you're working with, and maybe what is going to kind of start to build, you know, trust that they will feel like they can talk to you.
Yeah. For me, what has worked well is that I make myself open enough. I tend to use the word vulnerable. I don't know how well it goes down here in Australia, but that I need to be known to them. If I'm so much of an expert or so much of a, you know, a PhD, then I'm sheltered from them. So if I go and I'm like, you know, I just really screwed up, and I tell them how I screwed up, and they teach me how not to make that mistake the next time, then I begin to build some bridges.
Yeah, I would add to that, Jayde, with, you know, often you don't talk about the project. You start in Cambodia, you know, families loved it when I was pregnant, and that's what we would talk about. My family, where I come from, is my baby going to be a boy or a girl? What did we have for breakfast? And as Villy touched on, it was being there. It was being there every day, going to family dinners, going to breakfast, saying conversations, and that was as important, if not more, than the project discussions that we had. And I think, again, that can only happen often when you're there and when you're committed to this in a really long-term sense. Now, the tricky thing there is, so how do you do it when you're online in a 4-week project? I don't have the answers.
Oh, it's all online.
I think if I can just add to that, we had an interesting discussion in class the other day, and kind of bringing it back to professional learning as well. I think I know from my experience in industry, you know, I'd mentioned to a couple of the students in the class, I worked a lot with clients that were interstate, and I never physically met them at all. But I think those same tips and methods still apply. Build rapport, build trust, show up and be present. And I think, as Sarah touched on, just that fundamental importance of listening and not speaking, you know, and I'd had to work really hard on that myself. You know, really, I worked for an Indigenous owned design consultancy, and what I learned a lot through that work was learning not to say anything. And that's really hard, because we often get brought up to speak, particularly in the uni context. It's like say, and in architecture, we often get taught to be quite verbose and quite talkative, but I think that ability to just breathe and step back and allow the conversation to play out and not let your preconceived ideas take hold.
I would add also 2 things to that. One is this will benefit you more than it will people there, and just be comfortable with that, and that's okay. Don't even give a second thought. The second one, if it's all online, especially in reality, is body language. So, you know, have a ready smile. Be keen with eye contact. Don't, sorry, Tom, but don't turn your picture on. You know, but you know, it's all about we're human beings. I don't know your experiences, others who work in other countries. My suspicion globally is that eye contact and a smile is extraordinarily powerful. Okay, I mean, I know there's a gender thing in the nation too, but broadly speaking, especially online, be ready with your smiles and with the nodding, and then ready to engage and show you're willing. Don't look bored, because it'll kill everyone. So turn up the volume on those things, I think.
Could I ask a question, Eva? Or maybe Sarah and Villy and Ang? When you were able to go in person, and let's say you showed up at somebody's office or somebody's home, was there a long, like an hour or an hour and a half of just sitting there and drinking tea or whatever and chatting?
Yeah, we found that our most productive conversations were always around food. So we had a fantastic opportunity to go to Mondulkiri, a very regional province between Siem Reap and Phnom Penh. We had the opportunity to meet with the village chief, and there was a lot of translating between the Benong Indigenous language to Khmer to then English. But it was in the process of sharing a meal and having those informal conversations that then led to asking questions that we might not have thought of previously, but it's really understanding them as people. It's like not just as a subject or an interview person on the other side. It's about how they live their everyday lives, and it's learning that process to then understand the community and what the community needs. So it's, yeah, coming back to that individual connection. And yes, food was definitely a great help in that.
Yeah. So maybe on a practical level, if it's possible to program that in, like if they have a particular time to take tea or whatever it's called in Cambodia, you know, and that you show up online for that. Or those more casual moments, because it, like in China, the main point I want to make here is, I think, at least as an American, a Taiwanese American, efficiency is very much a part of the culture, like you get it done. And for working in Southeast Asia, I find that we need to distinguish between efficiency and effectiveness. Just because you get in, you talk, and you go through the meeting does not mean it's effective. You just talked and it was fast. The long-term effectiveness requires all of those hours of sitting there going, I don't know what's happening, or just drinking tea. So yeah, so if it's possible to somehow say, all right, you know, our students can't come and see you, but we would love to just get a feel and have that as a part of the program, that might help.
Sorry, I lost my microphone there. Yeah, and maybe that's something that Villy and Eng, you guys can test now. I think the other thing I found interesting being there is that the time of day makes a difference as to who you talk to, and gender comes into this. And so think about, well, what happens and who do I talk to when I'm there on a weekday morning versus a weekday evening versus a weekend? And of course, gender comes into how someone experiences a place and the challenges they face and the opportunities they see. And so does religion. And I think in Cambodia, you see, you know, sort of Buddhist, animist, and the practices there impact upon when you can talk to people. So think about time and who you talk to and whose stories you're hearing. And maybe that goes back to David's comment about whose reality counts, and also whose reality are you listening to. Well, it's 2:00. Any last questions? I know there's so many more and you guys are gold. I wish we could do this for hours and hours. But remember that Jayde, David and I all work for UNSW. So and we have Alum here and we have Villy, who's part of the program this year. So this isn't the end of the discussion. I can speak for myself in saying I'm always happy to talk on this stuff.
Me too.
Ditto.
Thank you. Anytime.
And Tom, I didn't intentionally leave you out there.
Really enjoy it, though, by the way. Really enjoy it. Give something of yourself and enjoy it. Jeez, what's the worst case? There is no worst case. It's completely enjoyable.
Good way to end.
Yeah, and Sasa's awesome. I love Sasa. Yeah,
They are.
Yeah.
I know. We're really lucky to have this opportunity. So yeah, enjoy it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. Okun charan, and have a good day. And we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.